Hey guys, and welcome to a complete and detailed guide about Frigg. Frigg is the newest Frost attack character with a base A rank in both Shatter and Charge, and she is also the first character to have the Ice Elemental Resonance, making her essential in any team composition revolving around Frost weapons. In this guide, I'll be going over what teams to play Frigg with, how to properly maximize her kit, and what's the best matrices available to use for her. So before we begin, here are my stats for Frigg. Currently, her weapon is at a level 60, and the weapons I use with Frigg right now are Marrow at a 1-star level 70 and Nemesis at 1-star level 100. With these weapon stats as well as my armor, my CS is roughly around 19,000 and my Frost attack is currently around 3,400. I don't have any matrices right now equipped for Frigg, so all the damage you'll see throughout this video is a naked level 60 Frigg. With all that covered now, let's first talk about the types of attacks Frigg has. So to begin, like all characters and their weapons, Frigg has a 5-hit combo normal attack as well as a 5-hit combo aerial attack. While normal attacking on the ground, you can hold your normal attack button to trigger Soaring Slash, which will propel the target into the air. And once you're airborne either by jetpacking, jumping, or using Soaring Slash, you can hold your normal attack button again, which will activate Helix Slash, making you spin towards the ground while dealing damage. For her dodges, Frigg only has one dodge attack, which is called the Multi-Slash, and as the name implies, it unleashes multiple slashes towards your enemy. To use multi-slash effectively though, you want to use her skill beforehand first. Her skill, Fimbulwinter, slashes the space around yourself and will suspend and launch targets nearby. Additionally, while using the skill, you are granted damage immunity, and at the end of the skill, a large frost domain is formed around you, giving the ability to perform an infinite number of dodges for 25 seconds while you're using Frigg or her weapon. An additional effect is given to you while you're inside the Frost domain as well, called Domain of Frost 1. What this does is increases Shatter by 25% when you're using a Frost weapon. So once this Frost domain is activated, you're able to spam multi-slash for a whole 25 seconds, and because the skill only has a 30-second cooldown, there's only 5 seconds of buffer where you cannot dodge an infinite amount of times. One important thing to remember with Fimbulwinter though is not to dodge or jump before the skill animation finishes. If you try to animation cancel with her skill, Frost Domain will not activate and only the damage of the skill goes through. Another thing to keep in mind is that you're only able to dodge an infinite amount of times while you're using Frigg. If you swap to another weapon, you're not getting the same effect, however you can still swap back to Frigg and the Frost Domain will remain as well as your ability to dodge infinite amount of times. Lastly, her discharge is pretty simple. It just clears all debuffs from the user like most other discharges does, and deals a large amount of damage while launching enemies into the air. Now let's go through her advancements. So at 1 star, you gain the ability to receive something called Frostiness points, and up to 10 can be accumulated. When Frost Domain ends, you deal damage based on how many Frosty points you acquired multiplied with your Frost attack and 95%. This blast damage is then dealt to all enemies inside the Frost Domain. However, keep in mind that during the duration of Frost Domain, you can lose 1 Frostiness point every 3 seconds you leave the area. To acquire Frostiness points, you're going to need to deal 550% of Frost attack while you're in your domain. This is something you'll stack naturally as you use Frigg more and more, so don't sweat about this too much. It's also important to note that Frost points don't go away after the skill Frost Domain expires. Because the downtime of the skill is only 5 seconds, you lose only 2 to 3 stacks during the time period, so it's actually possible to activate your skill for a second time and start with close to max stacks. Moving on, 2 stars is very simple and straightforward, but at 3 stars the frostiness limit is increased to 15, and now when you use discharge skills of other frost weapons in the Frost Domain, you deal more damage to all targets in the Frost Domain as well. At 4 stars, again, simple and straightforward, but at 5 stars now, when you shatter shields using frost weapons in the Frost Domain, it also freezes the target for 2 seconds and causes additional damage based on frostiness points. And if the target cannot be frozen for whatsoever, the additional damage is then doubled. And finally, at 6 stars, when your frostiness reaches 15, you will receive Domain of Frost 2, which increases Frost attack by an additional 12%. So if you're looking to advance Frigg at all, the best advancement in my opinion is most likely going to be just 1 star Frigg. And this is because 1 star gives a lot of additional damage when using her skill, and every other advancement is just a build on her 1 star abilities. Her 3-star, 5-star, and 6-star advancement are decent if you can afford to roll for that, but it's not necessary as it's just more DPS and doesn't change any core parts of her kick like 1-star Frigg does. And I just want to add 5-star Frigg seems very useless to me. And this is mainly just because you're never going to utilize that freeze. While 5-star Frigg does give you more damage, the freeze is just not needed at all because when you break your enemy's shield, they're going to be stunned anyways, and you can use other skills and weapons to layer stuns rather than investing in a 5-star Frigg to do so. So now let's talk about her traits real quick. So these traits are great for a team composition of Frost weapon, which I'll be going over later in the video, because as it says, it just increases frost attack. I will say though that I actually don't recommend getting her last trait because while it sounds like the crowd control immunity is nice in the frost domain, it actually doesn't provide anything, and this is just because since ideally you'll be dodge attacking infinitely, it's already extremely easy for you to dodge most attacks, and whether you mean to or not, with all this dodging that will happen in the frost domain, you are bound to trigger Fantasia at some point. That said, getting this trait is a very low investment as it's only just gifts, but if you want to save those gifts for someone else, I'd highly recommend to do so, but if you find yourself with an excess of gifts, you can still just get it for the sake of it. With all the basic stuff out of the way, let's finally talk about what matrices you want to use for Frigg. So as for SR matrices, Frigg excels at finding enemies in large groups, which is why the best SR matrix set is going to be Sobek as it increases damage dealt for each enemy nearby up to 3 stacks. And if you don't have a complete Sobek set, you can also use Een set, which works nicely with Frigg, especially if you have Frigg at 1 star. And the last viable option for SR matrices would probably be Peppers. Just know that if you do decide to use Peppers matrices, you're essentially changing her from a DPS to being a more support based character because you're going to be charging your discharge for other weapons more frequently. And honestly, this is perfectly fine. I think a lot of people are actually too fixated on trying to get Frigg to deal top damage, especially in PvE. But going the pseudo support route is honestly fine, especially if you have other SSR frost weapons such as Mero or Tsubasa with already multiple stars in them. So now that we're onto SSR matrices, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So unlike other characters, Frigg actually benefits more from having her matrix set on someone else. If we look at the description of what Frigg's matrix set does, you'll notice that for the 2-piece set, it says that when you swap from a frost weapon to another frost weapon, frost attack is increased for 10 seconds. This matrix effect is actually usable off-field, and the same applies to her 4-piece set, which is why it's actually more beneficial to use these matrices on another frost weapon in your party. So this frees up matrix slots for your Frigg, and the actual best matrices to put on Frigg is probably going to be a combination of either 2-piece Humas with either a 2-piece set of Samir, Shiros, or Crows. If you do have a 4-piece set of Samirs, Shiros, or Crows, feel free to use that for Frigg, but if you have a 2-piece set of Humas, hers is actually going to be the best for damage. And this is because with your skill Fimbulwinter, you have the ability to use your dodge attack for a whole 25 seconds. And Huma's 2-piece set is the perfect matrix to benefit off of this ability, as Bleed will continuously apply to enemies, melting their health. So now that we know what matrices to use for Frigg, let's finally move on to team comps. So obviously Frigg is going to be slotted into many Frost team comps, but it really depends on what game mode you're playing. For both solo and team play PvE, Frigg works best with a team full of Frost characters, ideally Frigg, Meryl, and Tsubasa. This team grants attack bonus and it just has a lot of synergy as Tsubasa and Frigg are both able to charge at a fast rate, and Meryl rounds it out by having great damage as well as a high shatter ring. Meryl also provides CC immunity of many of her attacks, so she's just able to provide some type of tankiness to the team, and if you have Meryl at 1 star as well, every time she breaks shield, she heals 10% of her HP, making this team having a little bit of everything. If you don't have either Meryl or Tsubasa, you can still swap either of them out for a Coco Ritter or an Een. And while you do lose a lot of DPS, Coco Ritter and Een still benefit from the Frost Resonance and can still make a full Frost team work. Another team that you could use is a combination of Frigg, Meryl, and Huma. So this team is obviously a little bit more tanky as the 402 trait is now activated. Frigg is also going to act as the weapon to charge up Meryl's and Huma's discharges, which is why I would recommend that if you do use this composition, to use Pepper's matrices on Frigg. This team is still really good though, and the ability to shatter shields is obviously increased, however it still falls to a team comp of Frigg, Meryl, and Tsubasa as that combination just has a lot more damage and everyone benefits from the Frost Resonance. As for PvP, a team comp of Frigg, Meryl, and Nemesis should suffice. And while Nemesis doesn't benefit from the Frost Resonance, Nemesis is just an S tier character in PvP, and honestly not using her in any comp just makes it insanely difficult to win matches. If you don't have Nemesis, you can slot in a Coca Ritter as well for your heals, and it will benefit from the Frost Resonance as well. But again, fighting in PvP without a Nemesis is just insanely difficult right now. I will say though that Frigg can work in PvP, but I find her still not to be that great. I tried her out in PvP and was able to win some matches, however her damage was just lacking just because it's still really easy for your opponent to kite out her Frost Domain and her skills. And like I mentioned before in this video, Frigg excels at fighting enemies that are in big groups. And while she can definitely be good at boss fight, she's very hard to fully utilize in PvP just because it's hard to land attacks on your moving opponent. If you're trying to pull Frigg for PvP, I'd highly recommend against it and just continue using the same few characters that have been dominating the meta of PvP. So overall, I have to say that Frigg is not a must-pull character like Nemesis was. However, her moveset and animation is so smooth and fluid to play that I honestly have a lot of fun with her in my teams and will continue using her just because of that. If you're someone who's looking to play meta in this game, Frigg is most likely not going to be that meta character, at least for now. Her Frost Resonance is definitely required for cross compositions, but you'll still probably get more damage right now out of fault teams with Nemesis. What I do find really interesting about Frigg is that Frigg can be both your main DPS, or if you decide to build her in a different way, you can also just have her be a pseudo support character like I mentioned before. And honestly, that might be the way to go, especially if you're a free-to-play player. This is mainly because you're not going to have a ton of SSR matrices yet, and most likely, you already have a lot of 1 stars or 2 stars for your SSR characters, and so you can use Frigg instead to just buff them up and have them output more damage, rather than trying to invest in a naked or 1-star Frigg. I do think Frigg will be more and more viable as the game progresses and there's more SSR matrices and more SSR Frost characters, but as for now, she just doesn't compete to other characters such as Nemesis. Don't get me wrong, Frigg is still useful and she's very fun to play. And if that's your main goal is to just have fun in this game, you should still pull for her just because she's really fluid and it helps elevate Frost compositions. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video helped you decide whether or not to pull for Frigg. And for those of you watching this with Frigg, I hope this video helped you get more insight on how to properly build Frigg. Let me know what guides you guys want next, and thank you so much for watching again. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, it means a lot to me. Peace.